Finally made it here. We have made it to the last work day and the last work week of the summer. We've made it. We've made it through the insufferable heat. We've made it through some droughts. We've made it through some torrential downpours, but we have made it. Congratulations to you and me. Next week, on next Monday, when we broadcast to you, it will be the first day of autumn. And I don't know about you, but I am truly, truly excited about that because it means cooler climes. There is that beautiful, ever increasing tapestry on the ground of multicolored fallen leaves and all of the things that are associated with the fall season. Hi, I'm Tim Alston. I am your host for the 10 Commandments of Leadership. This is a daily, weekly podcast series that has two main objectives. Number one, our goal is to educate, equip, and to empower emerging leaders with God-thought leadership. And secondly, our job is to present current events and newsmakers in the light of best practices from the Bible. You know, I'm old enough to remember a satirical television comedy program that originated over in the UK back in 1962-63. And it was entitled, That Was the Week That Was. That was the week that was. Informally, it was called TWTWTW or TW3. The American version of that under the same name was aired on NBC from 1964 to 1965. And it is actually what introduced us in America to the journalist and commentator David Frost. Yeah. That phrase, that was the week that was, could easily describe today and this week. Let's take a quick snapshot of this week's news headlines. Number one, the shooting death of Charlie Kirk last week has ramped up increased right-wing hatred. ABC has put on mothballs the Jimmy Kimmel Show, which is clearly a successor and a descendant of that 1960s That Was the Week That Was. What was virtually unpublicized in the national media was the lynching of two black men in Mississippi. The United States Attorney General is now trying to block the First Amendment's guaranteed rights of free speech to all Americans, especially those that they don't like. The latest job report shows that only 22,000 non-farmed jobs were added to our economy last week. It's a slowdown from previous months, and the unemployment rate has risen up to 4.3%. And this is the ugly thing to me, President Trump called NBC and MSNBC reporter Yamiche Alcindor a second-rate reporter. Why? Because she asked him too many tough interview questions. Let's face it, we're seeing and experiencing things that were just totally unimaginable 15 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. I mean, let's take, for example, that insurrection that happened at the Capitol building back in 2021. And on top of that, on day one of Trump's second administration, Trump 2.0, he pardoned all 1,600 of those insurrections. That, to me, is just unbelievable. I mean, I've lived through 11 previous U.S. presidencies, and never have I seen such blatant disregard and disrespect from this president across the board. I mean, he disrespects and disregards blacks and women and the rule of law. And yesterday, for example, He wrapped all three of those disrespects and all three of those disregards into one little tight package. Yesterday, for example, it was reported that his Department of Justice has struggled for 5 months to try to bring mortgage fraud charges against the New York Attorney General, Ms. Letitia James. She's Black, she's a woman, and she's New York's protector of the rule of law. Yes, Trump is not respectful. Trump is not fair. Trump is not honest. But hear me on this. There is one thing that Trump is not. Donald Trump is not the enemy. Let me say that again. For all of those things, Donald Trump is not the enemy. Quite frankly, don't give him that much credit. He ain't the enemy. He's just a puppet, not the puppeteer. Then who is the puppet? The Bible's Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 tells us, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." So what am I saying? Well, to be real frank about it, just like you and just like me, Trump is just flesh and blood. And don't get it twisted. He's just flesh and blood. I learned a long time ago that Satan, the devil, has to get permission from God before he can mess with you and me. Let me say that again to you. Satan has to ask God and get permission from God before he can mess with you and me. To be real honest about it, and I know you're not going to love me for saying this, what Donald Trump has done and been allowed to do has awakened us like never before. Virtually every night on the news, I'm watching protests march from all around the country. And when I look at the racial composition of the folks out there protesting against Trump policies, they look like people who, if you ask them, voted for Trump in 2024. I mean, Trump carried 31 of the 50 states. And I'm seeing these folk on the line. There are not a lot of people look like me out there because our basic attitude is, we told you so. In fact, according to Wikipedia, on just one day earlier this year, there was an estimated 3.3 to 4.6 million citizens involved in a protest march and protest marches across the country, making it the largest protest in U.S. history. What I want you to understand about Donald Trump, and I'm not low grading or making light of the idiocy that he is doing. But as I understand how God moves and how God works, Donald Trump, he's kind of like catfish. What do I mean by that? I once heard a story about salmon fishermen out in the Pacific Northwest who would catch salmon, and they would have them shipped back to the East Coast and Southeast for purchase. And they would ship them in these large water tanks. But by the time they got from the Pacific Northwest to the East Coast, to the Southeast Coast, to the South, these salmon were mushy, unmuscular, and kind of lazy, and not really fit for sale by those markets until someone or someone's got the bright idea. The natural enemy of salmon is the catfish. And so what they began to do is put a catfish, in those water tanks where the salmon were. And the catfish was a constant and perpetual perpetrator and agitator of those salmon. So they couldn't just lay still in the water. They had to keep moving around to avoid being approached or accosted by the salmon, by the catfish. And as a result of that, when they arrived to their destinations on the East Coast and the South, these fish were muscular. They were alert. They were ready to be purchased. All of us need a little catfish in our lives. We don't like it, but they help to keep us alert and on our toes. So that's what Donald Trump is to me and says to us. So what am I saying? We need to keep fighting. We need to keep protesting. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, and we are winning. They're not big bombastic wins, but they're significant wins. We see every week in the courts, every week in the news, the courts are denying him some charges, denying him his cases in the court. The big ones that I see is that of Harvard University. While some other schools and universities caved in to his demands, caved into his bullying, Harvard said, no, we ain't going for that. And Harvard recently won its case, and I believe will soon be getting back retroactively some of his research monies to do the kind of research to help to save lives. I also watched this week where after Trump assigned military into the city of Los Angeles and the city of Washington, D.C., he wanted to try it in Chicago, and its mayor, Johnson, and its governor, Pritzker, said, you ain't coming here. And the protest was so inflamed and so enraged and so enlarged, Trump had to back down. So we're winning little by little. And for that, I say hurrah, but we can't stop. We cannot stop. One of the things that I've learned as a sports fan is that the biggest defeats that we have typically come after our biggest victories. Why? Because in our victories, we celebrate, and we celebrate so much and so long that we let our guard down. In this battle, not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, we cannot let our guard down. Because, as the Bible says, the devil is like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And we can't allow him that level of victory in our lives. So once again, I say to you, and I say to you in love, and I say to you in honesty, for all the things that Trump is not the enemy. Don't get it twisted. He's flesh and blood like you and me. Yes, let's continue to protest. Let's continue to discuss. Let's continue to militate. Let's continue to arm ourselves. But he is not the enemy. He's just the puppet. He's not the puppeteer. The puppeteer is Satan. The puppeteer is the devil. And the sooner we understand that, and we understand the fact that God hovers over and loves us and protects us, then what we will do is do everything we can to win our side for his glory and our edification. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. This has been the 10 Commandments of Leadership. And if anything I've said made any sense to you, please like, share, and subscribe to it. And I'll see you next Monday, the first day of autumn, for a new episode of the 10 Commandments. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.